And call the meeting to order. Welcome everybody and everybody in Zoom land. As Kathleen said, I'm sure you're knocking the door in, but COVID's here and you can't come in. So another blessing from COVID. We have an exciting meeting with audits and green plan Secret. I mean, who could ask for more? That's a double bill. It really, no one would want to miss out on. So we'll start off with the audit. I believe John is here. John Costello.
Yep. John Costello, director with the FPR group. We're the independent external auditors for the village. Hopefully Michelle has provided you with copies of the draft financial statements as well as the audit wrap-up document. I'm just going to go through the audit wrap-up document and not go through the detail of the financials, but I will answer any questions if there are any at the end.
Okay.
The first page, this is just our cover letter stating that professional standards require us to communicate with the board regarding matters related to the audits that are, in our professional judgment, significant and relevant to your responsibilities in overseeing the financial reporting process. We communicated our audit plan back in April 12th, 2018 to the village as of and for the year ended May 31st, 2020. This is just to let you know how things went and allow you the chance to ask any questions of me directly. Going on to page 3. We have substantially completed our audit of the financial statements as of and for the year ended May 31st, 2020. Our audit was conducted in accordance with auditing standards generally accepted in the United States of America and standards applicable to financial audits contained in government auditing standards issued by the Comptroller of the United States. The audit does not relieve management or those charged with governance of their responsibilities. Our objective was to obtain reasonable, not absolute assurance about whether the financial statements are free from material misstatements. The scope of work performed was substantially the same as that described to you in our earlier audit planning communications. We will be issuing an unmodified opinion on the financial statements. All records and information requested by EFPR was freely available for our inspection. Management cooperation was excellent. We received full access to all information that we requested, and everybody was professional throughout the course of the work. The only open items for the financial statements, that's review and approval by the Board of Trustees. After that, we'll perform some final subsequent event procedures and then seek management's signature on the management representation letter. Page 4. The village's significant accounting practices and policies are those included in note 1 to the financial statements. These accounting practices and policies are appropriate, comply with generally accepted accounting principles and industry practice, were consistently applied and adequately described. Significant estimates are those that require management's most difficult, subjective, or complex judgments, often as a result of the need to make estimates about the effects of matters that are inherently uncertain. The village's significant accounting estimates, including a description of management's processes and significant assumptions used in developing these estimates, are disclosed in the notes to the respective financial statements. Some of the more significant ones are the useful lives of capital assets, accounting for pensions, that's your ERS, PFRS, and LOSAP, compensated absences, and your total other post-employment benefits or OPEB liability. Management did not make any significant changes to the processes or significant assumptions used to develop the significant accounting estimates during the year ended May 31st, 2020. The methods used to account for significant transactions and related disclosures are considered appropriate. We go on to list some of the more significant financial notes. Your long-term liabilities, that's your debt, your pension plans for ERS and TRS, your LoSAP, that's your Volunteer Firefighter Length of Service Award Program, as well as your OPEB or other post-employment benefits. There were no material misstatements related to counts and or disclosures that we brought to attention of management. The information being provided to you by Michelle has been essentially correct. There were no uncorrected misstatements other than those that were clearly trivial related to accounts and or disclosures that were presented to management. Page 5, this is internal control over financial reporting. In planning and performing our audit of the financial statements, we consider the village's internal control over financial reporting as the basis of designing our audit procedures for the purpose of expressing our opinion on the respective financial statements, but not for the purpose of expressing an opinion on the effectiveness of the village's internal control. Accordingly, we do not express an opinion on the effectiveness of the village's internal control. As part of obtaining reasonable assurance about whether the village's financial statements are free from material misstatement, we perform tests of its compliance with certain provisions of laws, regulations, contracts, and agreements. Non-compliance with which could have a direct material effect on the determination of financial statement amounts. However, providing an opinion on compliance with those provisions was not an objective of our audit, and accordingly, we do not express such an opinion. Happy to relay that the results of our tests disclose no instances of non-compliance or other matters that are required to be reported under government auditing standards. Our consideration of internal control was for the limited purpose described. It was not designed to identify all deficiencies in internal control that might be considered significant deficiencies or material weaknesses. We are required to communicate in writing to those charged with governance all material weaknesses and significant deficiencies that have been identified in the village's internal control over financial reporting. I'm not going to go through the definitions. These just has the different levels, but the main fact is there were no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies reported. Other required communications on page 6. There's no significant changes to the planned audit strategy or significant risks initially identified and previously communicated. There was no matters noted relevant to the audit, included but not limited to violations or possible violations of laws, regulations, risk of material misstatements, including fraud risk or tips or complaints regarding the village's financial reporting that we were made aware of as a result of our inquiry of those charged with governance. We are not aware of that management has been consulting with other accounting firms or opinion shopping. There was no significant disagreements with management about matters. There was no significant difficulties encountered during the audit. And there are no matters that we consider significant to the oversight of the village's financial reporting process that we have not previously communicated. Again, we'll request a management representation letter, which will be available upon completion of our audit prior to the issuance. Other communications. This is just a general list of the significant upcoming Gatsby announcements. Major ones that might affect the village are fiduciary activities. The village will have to make an assessment of what's in the fiduciary fund, and they're reclassifying everything. So unless it's purely custodial, it'll either have to get moved to its own fund or moved back into the general fund. Leases, statement 87. I know you guys have some leases. They're not necessarily material at the moment, but please be aware of that. It makes you record an asset and related liability and does away with the concept of the operating lease. Most of the others aren't really that would not really affect the village. Maybe statement number 96, subscription-based information technology arrangements. That's similar to the leases. They're considering software licenses as a right to use asset, and we'll be treating them in a similar manner as the leases. You'll have a lease asset, lease liability, which will get amortized and expensed according to the rules. Page 8, our independence communication. This is just letting you know that the engagement letter that we talked about earlier describes our responsibilities in accordance with professional standards and certain regulatory authorities with regards to independence and the performance of our services. These letters also stipulate the responsibilities of the village with respect to independence as agreed to by the village. Like I said, I wasn't going to go into detail on the financial statements, but are there any questions regarding them?
Yes, John, on page 34, under actuarial assumptions,
Okay.
I believe I brought this up last year. Mortality rates are based on male mortality. Our fire department has both male and female members. So is there a mortality rate table that has both male and female that should be used?
There might be one available. I know this is done through, was it Milliman? So that's correct, Michelle, right?
So we use Enflex for the LoSAP. We use Milliman for the OPEB. So
Okay, yep, my fault. Okay, I didn't realize this was the LoSAP portion. Yeah, so you can, for the next upcoming one, you can have that discussion with Penflex. They're the ones that prepare the Gatsby 68, Gatsby detail for this. It's, again, this is just an estimate, so I mean, it might change the numbers slightly, but these numbers swing a lot just from any minor change. So if you look at like page 35, even just changing the discount rate 1%, you could go from a liability of 1.2 million up to a liability of 1.4 if it went down 1%. And if it went up 1%, you go from 1.2 down to 1.0 essentially. So you're getting a $200,000 swing just by a 1% change in the discount rate. Yeah, you should bring that up with Milliman and discuss their use of the mortality table, but these are just estimates to use for the statement of net position. They're not necessarily liabilities recorded within, well, they're not liabilities recorded within the fund level accounting.
So it sounds like, John, I missed that, Marie. Thank you for pointing that out. It sounds like ideally we would be able to work from a table that shows male and female, but you don't anticipate that changing that table would make a significant swing.
No, not with that table. I mean, it's part of the calculation, but the biggest piece is your discount rate. You know, that's the big driving factor. But I understand your concern. Like I said, when it comes around time for the next year for them to do that, Michelle could probably have a discussion with them to make sure they're using what best mimics the makeup of the firefighters. But they do have the names and the genders of the firefighters when they do this. So I'm not sure if why they chose strictly the male mortality table.
Later on in the report, there is reference to a female and male mortality table. So that led me to believe that there was available such an alternate table that could be used. Michelle, can you bring that up when we go through this next year?
Yes, I did email Penflex. I'm sure they're, working from home as well and have other audits, but I did email them, maybe on Friday when we spoke, so I could follow up with them and see if they have an answer. It also might be that they used it and they just didn't make a note of it when they sent us the report. But I did ask to have a conversation with Penflex about that.
Thank you.
Mhm.
John, on page 36, under plan description, the third bullet, retired participants and their spouses are responsible for contributing 14%. Should that be noted there? The prior bullet does identify covered retirees and their spouses.
Okay, I can change that because that says participants. It doesn't necessarily say retiree or spouse. But I can
Okay.
change the wording to say participants, and I can add and
It's for retired participants and their spouses, whether or not the spouses are at retirement age, are responsible for contributing to the cost of their health insurance coverage.
Can I suggest maybe we change that retired participants are responsible for contributing 14% for their health insurance coverage without dependents, because we do have some retired participants that have dependent children. So if we're gonna add spouses, I'd rather just cover the entire family.
Okay, yes, because it is for, gotcha.
okay, yeah, if you want to shoot me an email with the wording you would like in there, I can make that change tomorrow.
Okay.
It's just the wording. The participants, retired participants, do in fact pay in 14%.
Okay, it's not a problem making the change.
I have no other comments or questions.
I'm good. John, can I ask you a question on the wrap up? Just a fast question on page 3 where it says EFPR group work papers and says perform final subsequent event procedures. What would those be?
That's just inquiring of Michelle if there's been any new information since the end of the audit that we should be including in the financial statements. That would be if there's any lawsuits brought up that we might not have been aware of. We do call up your, do a follow with your legal before we issue these, but we make sure there's been no debt issued, no new lawsuits that we might not be aware of, or any other major factors that could influence the perception of the numbers. But we're not looking for small items. We're looking for, like I said, if new debt was issued, if a large lawsuit was initiated, or items like that, or like major emergency occurred at the village, like say, there was a huge water main break that's going to cost you a lot of money. We always do this right before we issue the financial statements to try to make sure we have current information on how the village is operating.
Okay, thank you.
Kathleen or Heidi, I'm good.
I have no questions.
Good, thanks.
Okay.
Just one more comment. Michelle, nice job. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
As always, Michelle, thank you.
Yes.
Thank
So
you.
the other communications at the back of the, John was telling us about things that are changing and reporting that would be changing. I assume that Michelle is the officer who, the staff member who tracks and is aware of those things. And as the year goes on, she comes up to speed on these changes in statements, and then they get incorporated into the accounting.
Yes, if they apply. I work with John and he helps guide me on some of the changes.
Cool.
Yep.
Thanks.
Okay, if there are no more questions at the moment, Michelle and Jeff both have my email and phone number. We're available all year long, not just during the audit period. So if you have any questions, feel free to contact me.
Thank you, John.
Great, John. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thanks, John.
Okay,
Have a
enjoy
good-
the rest of your meeting.
Have a good holidays, John.
Oh, happy holidays to you too.
Thank you.
Hopefully you don't get too much snow.
Well,
You like snow.
Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Moving ahead here, I see we have Ted on, I believe. I saw him before.
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, Ted. How are you?
Good, thanks. How are you, Dave?
Good. I don't think we've
Hi,
ever.
Marie.
Hi, Ted.
Hi, Kathleen.
Hi, good to see you again after a
Good
very
to
long
see you
time.
too. It's been a long time.
So I guess Marie has been working with Ted and knows this intimately. So Marie, if you'd like to kind of make an introduction here.
Yes.
And then Ted, you can follow up and we'll work this out with the secret, I believe it's mostly about. So Marie, take it
Sounds
away.
good.
Okay, so there are multiple reasons why Ted is on the agenda tonight. Ted has provided us with a resolution, which we'll get to in a few minutes, that will identify the village board as the lead agency for secret for the code update. Ted has also provided us with an EAF that has been completed. I sent around later this afternoon an update to the EAF incorporating some of the comments that I received earlier than today. So you have an updated EAF in your email. And then the other thing that Ted will do tonight is to take us through a flow chart of how the secret process works for municipal boards. So I've asked Ted to take us through the EAF and then the two paths or the multiple paths through the secret process so that the village board can decide which path they wish to pursue based upon the information that is associated with the code update. So with that, one other factor you should know. When the Code Update Committee was originally established back in October of 2014, and then somewhat reconstituted in March or April of 2015, Ted was identified as the consultant to the Code Update Committee. So he is intimately familiar with the objective of the Code Update Committee. Ted's firm, Green Plan, was the consultant for the comprehensive plan, the LWRS, and the LWRP. So he is even more intimately familiar with those documents and the process that those documents went through to get approved and accepted. So my point is he is quite familiar with the steps that the village has taken from developing a comprehensive plan to the point where we are now, which is the Code Update Committee addressed the 29 topics which were felt to be deficient in the LWRP, which prevented the LWRP from being accepted by the Department of State. And Ted has remained involved with the Code Update Committee and to the point where we are right now, which is the village board review of the code updates that have been suggested by the Code Update Committee. With that, I'll turn it over to Ted.
Thanks, Marie.
All right, good.
Okay, thank you, Marie, and good evening, everyone. It's nice to meet everybody virtually. For those that I don't know already, but I have been involved in Cold Spring, I think since 2009, was when I originally came on board. And the thing that's really remarkable about where you are today is that this process actually began in 1987, when the village made its first attempt to adopt a local waterfront revitalization program, which is a state program that allows the village to take over the state's process of regulating activities and so forth within the coastal area based upon New York State's coastal management program. And the village was not successful in preparing its first, it's known as a LWRP, short for Local Waterfront Revitalization Program. So the village wasn't successful in that. And I think it took quite a long time for the village to regroup and to begin a process of trying to seek another local waterfront plan that would be approved by New York State. And of course, local waterfront revitalization programs as a component of the state's coastal management program is also tied in with the federal coastal zone management program, because the coastal management program is a delegated program to those states that have coastal areas. And so in addition to New York State approving the local waterfront plan, there's also a consent that's required for the federal government to eventually approve it after New York State approves the coastal management program, known as the LWRP in the village. So anyway, it's been a long road for the village to get here. I'm happy to see that you're this far along in the process. There are other communities that have faced a similar plight. I can tell you my own community of Rhinebeck began working on their local waterfront program in the mid-1980s, and they did not successfully have a coastal management program, an LWRP, that was approved by the state until I think 2007. So it took them 20 some years actively working to try and get this kind of a program approved locally as well. So what I'd like to do, just in terms of, oh yeah, sure, absolutely.
Just the benefits maybe for everyone of actually, being successful in, and moving this program forward. What are the benefits to the village,
Of the coastal, of the LWRP?
Yes.
Okay, so the benefit
we're
is
going
that because it's a federal agency program, the federal government, the state government operates as a higher level of government. And so they're able to come into the village and they can approve projects that are exempt from local regulation. And New York embarked on a rather unique program in the early 1980s that allowed New York to, in the same way that the federal government delegates their responsibility for coastal zone management to the states, New York State created a program in the early 1980s that allowed them to delegate the responsibility for coastal management to local governments in New York State. And many communities jumped on the opportunity to be able to have a say in state and federal agency decision-making. And that's the principal benefit of having a local waterfront plan in place, is that once the state and the federal government approve the Village of Cold Springs LWRP, the village's policies as they've been developed as a refinement of the state and the federal policies give the village quite a bit of authority to be able to say yes or no to things that are much more oriented to the village's unique character, the unique aspects of the Village of Cold Springs. So you can actually have a say in federal and state agency actions within the village, and that's not normally attainable by a local municipal corporation like the Village of Cold Spring. So that's the main benefit. You get to enact this local waterfront program, and you get to administer it, and you get to have a say in state and federal agency actions. So there's a lot of advantages to it. New York State, fortunately, has provided dollars for local government to be able to prepare local waterfront programs. And what they've actually done is New York State has expanded the program because it has been so successful around the state in the coastal areas that they've expanded it to other inland areas where the focus is more on watersheds, such as the Delaware River watershed and other watersheds in New York State. Typically, when you think of coastal areas, you think of Long Island, you think of New York City, you think of the estuarine portion of the Hudson River up to the Troy Dam. But the coastal management program also involves the Great Lakes. It involves both Lake Erie, the Niagara River, and Lake Ontario as well. Then it was extended to Lake Champlain, and after that, it was extended even beyond that in New York State. So it's been a fairly successful program.
Thank you.
Any other questions before I move on? Because I think, as I understood it, what you were really looking for was input on what were the roles and responsibilities of the village board as far as the State Environmental Quality Review Act was concerned. And so what I thought I'd do is just spend a few minutes giving you a broad overview of that program. It's known as Seeker. Some of you may be familiar with it. You've probably already conducted Seeker reviews on different actions that you've taken. But when you're ready to enact changes to the village code, and these actions involve land use, then it becomes critically important to follow both the process as well as the substance of Seeker. And it's a law that's become a standard pretty much since its inception in 1976, when all agency actions in New York State, and when I say agency, that's local government, local municipalities, so it's cities, towns, villages, counties, school districts, special purpose districts, as well as every state agency in New York State, has to abide by the rules that are in place for Seeker. And there's been lots of litigation over the time period beginning in 1976. And that litigation has been directed at both the substance of Seeker, in other words, what the legislature said was the purpose of Seeker and how that should be carried out, as well as the procedures that apply to all agency actions within New York State. And if you don't follow both the substance and the process that's required for Seeker, a court can invalidate whatever action you eventually want to enact if it's not done properly. And so just to give you a little bit of an overview of what Seeker is all about, the law sets pretty lofty goals. It basically says that we're all stewards of the environment and every citizen has a responsibility to preserve and enhance the quality of the environment. Seeker also has other goals, that we're all stewards of the air, the land, the water, living resources, and the law imposes an obligation on every agency to protect the environment for future generations. And so every agency in New York State, and this is a quote, shall be regulated to prevent environmental damage. And that's the purpose of Seeker, is to create this regulatory structure that state and local government has to follow in terms of the way that it administers Seeker. And so just to begin with, Seeker, it applies to the environment. So what does the environment mean? And, most people, when they think of the environment, they think of air, water, land, maybe historic resources, that sort of thing. But the environment is all inclusive in the definition that was set by the state legislature. So it's, in addition to land, air, water, it also includes things like minerals, flora and fauna, noise, agricultural resources, archaeology, historic, prehistoric resources, aesthetics, scenic areas, patterns of population growth, distribution of that growth, existing community character. That's a big one. And that's one of the topics that will have to be addressed by the village board, because you're changing the regulatory structure that applies to land use within the village. And so the community or neighborhood character is something that's going to have to be addressed. Human health, that's another part of the whole definition of what constitutes the environment. And so one of the basic purposes of Seeker is to lessen environmental impacts as a result of agency actions as it affects that environment. And so seeker requires that where you identify any adverse impacts or significant adverse impacts, that you also identify mitigation measures to lessen those impacts. And if you're not able to identify mitigation measures to lessen those impacts, to identify alternatives to your actions so that you can become this steward of the environment and protect it for future generations. And so the way that seeker works, and what I'm going to do, if it's okay, I'd like to share the screen right now so you can all see what I have on here. And this is a very, can everybody see that?
Yep.
The flow chart? Okay. So this is a real simplified flow chart of the seeker actions. And it was, and basically what you have before you is a code revision package that involves a number of different code sections, principally your zoning, but also other aspects of the code update process. And so as a whole, this whole package could potentially be subject to seeker, although the degree to which the assessment of impacts needs to be made is going to vary dependent upon what section of the code. And the biggest focus is going to be on zoning, because that has the greatest effect on land use and on the environment of the village of Cold Spring. So the primary emphasis there will be on zoning, but to a other extent, subdivision, water, sewer, sidewalks, a whole variety of other code provisions that the Code Update Committee and the Village Board has been considering will also be included in this overall action. So to run you through this process, all right, let me see if I don't know if this makes any difference to enlarge it a little bit. But what I'd like to do is to point out a couple of things. One of the things that seeker does is it creates varying layers of review in the process of municipal and state government, and the way that seeker has to be addressed. And so what they've done is they've created 3 different types of actions. There are Type 1 actions, which are actions that by definition are more likely to have a significant impact on the environment. Not that they will, but that they're more likely to have a significant impact on the environment and therefore should be subject to study under a full environmental impact statement. Then there are Type 2 actions, and these are actions where there are thresholds that are established within the regulations. And if you don't meet that threshold, then it's considered a minor action and it's not even subject to seeker, okay? Then there's the broadest range of different actions in New York State are what are called unlisted actions. And they're exactly that. There are no thresholds. There's no identification of exactly what there are. There's simply all of those actions that are not either Type 1 or Type 2, which are both enumerated within the regulations. And so unlisted actions are treated differently from Type 1 actions. Type 1 actions, because they are more likely to have a significant impact on the environment, normally, but not always, will go through a more stringent environmental review process. So this flowchart that you're looking at right now primarily addresses what happens if you have an action that's either a Type 1 action or an unlisted action. And some of the initial steps in how Type 1 and unlisted actions are treated are going to be treated in the same way, because there's preliminary steps that need to be taken that all of the actions that are subject to seeker have to go through. And so the first one is, can everybody see my cursor moving around here?
Yeah.
Okay. So the first one is upon receipt of the EAF. And this is set up so that it can apply both to what are called direct agency actions. Those are the actions of the Village Board of Trustees because it's the Village Board that has proposed as project sponsor an update to its codes. The other type of action is the kind that's typically done by the Planning Board or the Zoning Board of Appeals within the village. And those are actions where an applicant has come before either the Planning Board or the Zoning Board and asked for an approval, okay? So the first step in the process, though, is to prepare the environmental assessment form, and there's different parts to the environmental assessment form. What I sent out to Marie for distribution to everybody was the Part 1 EAF, okay? So upon receipt of that EAF, the first thing is to classify the action. Is it type 1, type 2, or unlisted, okay? And then to identify whether or not there's any other involved agencies or whether there's any federal agencies involved in that action. For the village board, you are the sole agency that's responsible for adoption of the village code. There is no other agency that is involved in that code update process. Now you may ask, well, what about the county? Don't they have a role in reviewing this? And they do, but they're not considered an involved agency because their review responsibility under Section 239 of New York State's General Municipal Law is an advisory review. It's not considered an agency action or an agency approval under the definitions within the regulations, okay? So that's the first step. Classify the action, identify involved and interested agencies, all right? If there's multiple agencies, then there has to be what's called a coordinated review, and that's mandatory for type 1 actions. You don't have to worry about that. So I'm just going to skip over number 2, okay, which is to select the lead agency within 30 days. And so we can jump right into the step 3 here, which is to review the environmental assessment form to determine the significance of the action. And what this does, this refers to 2 different forms, the short form for unlisted actions, because if you remember, the unlisted actions are not subject to that same level of review that type 1 actions are, because the type 1 actions are more likely to require the preparation of an EIS and are more likely to create a significant adverse impact on the environment. So that's where you have to use the full environmental assessment form. So the short form is only 3 pages long. The long form is 13 pages, not including part 2 and part 3, which also adds to the length of the full environmental assessment form. All right. So that's the third step in the process. The fourth one is to determine the significance of the action. And the way that this is done is to look at the part 1 environmental assessment form. What does it say about the action? To then prepare the part 2 environmental assessment form, which is a list of all of those different types of topics that are covered in that broad definition of the environment. There's a section under the impact on land and a section under impact on water, all the way down to a section under impact on community character. And there's 19 different discrete sections that have to be assessed in terms of their potential for adverse impacts on a wide variety of different topics. There's more than 100 different questions just on the part 2 EAF alone that have to be addressed, okay? Then you take the part 1, the part 2 EAF, and you compare the kinds of potential impacts that could occur as a result of the action, all right? And you compare those with what are called the criteria for determining significance. And this is one of the sections within the Secret regulations that involves a review of another further set of criteria, such as, will the action have the potential to remove endangered species habitat? Will the action have the potential to have a detrimental effect on the community character of the municipality, and so forth and so on? And there's a whole long list of different criteria that you use to determine the significance of the action, okay? So we're still in that first 4 steps of the process right now. You haven't even done the step 2 yet. So that's what comes with that draft resolution that was sent out to everybody for their review and consideration for tonight.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
I'm not sure, maybe this will be addressed farther along here. And since this secret review is on all of the chapters as a whole, is there a way to break this down for the ones that we can identify that do not need seeker, or could have a neg deck, and we move forward with those, since it's such a large, since what we're trying to approve in the code is so many chapters, and some, like you said, are identified like zoning, are definitely going to probably be a type 1 action, I guess. Is there a way to break this into 2 different segments and have a track that way, so that a number of them can go before the public and they can digest those, instead of dropping a whole packet of this whole code and having the public review at a public, hearing?
Great question, Dave. Marie and I have already talked about this, and Marie has already forwarded to me a whole package of all of the different code sections that are being addressed. And that's my next task, is to review all of those code sections, because for exactly the reasons that you just stated, which is that some of them may not even need to be subject to this further analysis that will probably be required for, will be required for the zoning at a minimum. There may be others that have some effect on land use within the village, or have some effect on the environment. And so that's why I asked Marie to be very thorough in providing me with the drafts that has been prepared to date, so that I can look at each one, read through it, and then we can very well eliminate some of them. But I wanted to at least look through them to make sure that they didn't have some potential for having an impact on the environment, and needed to be reviewed as part of the overall code update process.
And Ted, that wouldn't be considered segmentation if you're breaking the package into pieces like that? I mean, it sounds like a very logical way to attack the project so that people can absorb reasonable chunks. But if you're breaking off certain chapters, how are you not segmenting up the project?
Well, if you look at the action as a series of internal actions, they may not all have a logical relationship to the environmental review that you're going to be obligated to conduct. So I won't know until I've completed that review whether or not it's something that could be done as a separate seeker review process, which I think in the end, the goal would be to make sure that you avoid segmentation, because I think that's an important point that you raised, Kathleen, that seeker requires that all agencies that have some common impacts with the primary action, which is the action of updating your zoning regulations and other land use controls. And if there's other related actions that may not have any potential for a significant impact on the environment, then I think you can identify them as related, but not necessarily a part of the overall action. All right. And let me just take a quick look, because I think there's a number of them that can easily be eliminated from consideration.
Yeah, but
without
it's useful to hear an example. I mean, it doesn't have to be from ours necessarily, but an example of what kind of thing, what kind of code change would be something that could be pulled out.
So, for example, taxation
Uh-huh.
has nothing to do with environment, land use, anything. Another example might be Code of Ethics.
Oh,
Has
okay.
nothing. So those are actually two chapters that have been modified, but have no relationship at all to land use, environmental.
And you could make a defensible argument for separating them from the land use package.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. And I think that with that said, I think it's also important to identify these as related actions and to develop a rationale for why they wouldn't be included. You know, if there is, and of course, one of the things that can be revealed in this process is, and I haven't gotten to it yet because it's one of the steps in the process, which is to scope the overall undertaking and to define those things that can be eliminated and have a separate path for approval from the overall effort. But I think that it's worth looking at each one individually to develop a list of all of those things that bear some relationship to the logical progression of review processes here. And I think it's critical that if segmentation is going to be avoided, that we at least identify related actions to the greatest extent possible. And if there is any hint at all that they have some potential for being defined as part of the environment and as part of the action, simply include them.
Got it. Thank you for explaining that.
Sure. Okay. So there are only two different paths that the village board can follow under the Secret regulations because it's a type 1 action. And that is to either go through the environmental review process that I just talked about up to step 4, which is prepare the EAF, all 3 parts, part 1, part 2, part 3. And part 3 is essentially a narrative that describes the assessment of impacts that's in the part 2 EAF. And the inclusion of the review of the criteria for determining significance would be an important part of that. If the village board wanted to proceed with what's called a negative declaration. A negative declaration means that the proposed action, the adoption of the code update provisions, will not have a significant impact on the environment. Okay. And once that determination has been made, so there's no adverse impacts whatsoever. You issue a negative declaration, your secret process is completed. You can move forward with consideration of adoption of the code update. Okay. That's an option. The other option available is that there is the potential for one or more significant adverse impacts. And therefore, the village board decides they're going to issue what's called a positive declaration to require the preparation of an environmental impact statement. Okay. This right here is not applicable to type 1 actions. So you can either make a determination there's no adverse environmental impacts, and you have to go through a process in addition to your preparation of the full EAF, part 1, part 2, part 3, the review of the criteria for determining significance. The village board and every other agency is required to make what's called the reasoned elaboration of what the potential is for environmental impacts or not in a written form. And that's in the form of a negative declaration. Okay. So if there's this potential for one or more potentially significant adverse impacts, then really your only choice is to issue a positive declaration and to move forward with an environmental impact statement process. Okay. And so what happens with that, there is a multi-step process. There's at least 5 steps involved if the determination is made that you'll move forward with an environmental impact statement. So
Could
the first,
for a second, just
yeah,
to clarify before you keep going. So if this assumes that at 5A, we have let's say we did identify things we could peel off. We have peeled those things off and are continuing with what remains here.
Mhm.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So then project scoping is conducted. That's the first step in the process. Scoping involves an examination of the proposed action, and it involves an examination of what aspect of the environment will be affected by the adoption of the code amendments. And it's done in a public way. There is a scoping document, a draft scoping document that's prepared. It's distributed to the public so they have an opportunity to review it. There is a public scoping process that allows members of the public, interested public, to comment on the draft scoping document. And then the village board would prepare a final scoping document. And that document then sets out all of the various topics that will be addressed in a draft environmental impact statement.
Ted, where does, so the code update right now is in draft form.
Mhm.
There have been no public meetings, sorry, there have been public meetings, but there have been no public hearings. Does the public scoping occur before or after the public hearings on the code?
Well, if it's going to be a formal public hearing, it would happen before the public hearing. There wouldn't be any reason to, if you wanted to have a public information meeting, a more informal meeting to present the code update process as it's currently constituted. And I think that could happen at any time. But a formal public hearing, basically the way that the secret review process works is that there is not a requirement for a public hearing as part of a environmental impact statement process. However, for this kind of an action, it would be advisable to have a public hearing on the environmental impact statement and to consolidate that with the public hearing or hearings on the code updates. Okay.
My estimate is that somewhere between 4 and 6, ignoring secret for a moment,
Mhm.
my estimate is that between 4 and 6, 4 and 8 public hearings would be necessary. So why do I say that? The zoning chapter, which is one of 50 chapters,
Yep.
is approximately 100 pages long. That does not include the draft zoning map.
Mhm.
And it would seem to me that to have a 100-page document go through a public hearing, certainly there's the advance, what do you make available? And then there's the public hearing. My expectation is that there will be copious comments at the public hearing, potentially going on beyond one meeting.
Mhm.
So in my mind, it's going to be a long process to go through the public hearings for all of the chapters, which are required which are required to get to adopting the new code, right? Which is different than the scoping.
Mhm. Yes. Yes. And it does come at a later time because scoping is the initial attempt by the village board to identify what is going to be the contents of the environmental impact statement in an annotated document that describes what is going to be the quality of the studies and the assessment of impacts that is included within the environmental impact statement. So you wouldn't have a public hearing necessarily, you would have a public scoping session on the scoping of the draft environmental impact statement. And this, by the way, your heads are probably swimming at this point with all of the details of this. But the kind of environmental impact statement that would be prepared for this kind of an action, it's actually considered a generic environmental impact statement because it's not actually addressing a physical alteration of the village. It's not addressing the actual impacts of any kind of a land use change. It's only addressing the impacts of the actual changes to the village's regulation that then results in further seeker analysis when applicants come before the village planning board, for instance, for an approval under these revised regulations.
So do you want to have the code, the version of the code that goes through the seeker process to be as I don't know how to say this except to say cleaned up, as cleaned up and inclusive of public comment and participation as possible, so that when you get to the EIS portion, you've got a reasonably, you're looking at a version of the code that reasonably represents the impact that code would have. Like, it sounds, what I think you're saying, let me be quiet and let you answer that first.
Yes, to answer your question, I believe that you want to have the document as close to the way you think the document will be adopted, because there are additional complications if there are significant changes that are made to the document after the seeker review process ends.
Right.
And those involve preparation of what are called supplemental environmental impact statements. And I think you want to avoid that because that's going to stretch out the entire review process for all intents and purposes, after a lot of work is done to assess this, the potential impacts and any changes that would be made to the code provisions.
So are you and Marie sort of coalescing around the idea that the public hearings on the content of the code happen before? Initially, I imagined, I don't know what I imagined. I imagined that we were talking about this as sort of a parallel process, but now as you talk through it, it sounds like you're coming to the idea that it makes sense to do the public hearings first and then set off on the seeker process.
Well,
Tonight we have the potential to declare lead agency status, but that sets off a time clock, right? I don't know how the time clock works with.
No, it doesn't set off a time clock. The regulations and the times that you see in these 4 little boxes here apply to applications that are received by the board for agency approvals. But this is a different animal because this is a direct agency action by the village board of trustees. It's not subject to, it's subject to certain minimum requirements that are fulfilled as part of the obligation to involve the public in the review process. But it's not subject to the same broad directory timeframes that ensure that an agency consideration of a development approval are done on a timely basis.
Because we're not needing to move an applicant through a process. It's our process that we are moving through.
Yes.
And so now looping back again, that brings me back to, it sounds like it makes sense to do the public review portion and then set out upon the process of.
Yes. And to the extent that, there's no way to be able to predict how this process is going to unfold once you do get into the seeker review process. I've seen these things go smoothly. I've seen them go not so smoothly. And it's very difficult to tell.
It's going to be totally smooth, Ted.
It's what? It's going to be totally smooth.
Sure. Ted, can I ask a question?
Just like the LWRP has been today.
Can I go back for a second? Because when we started this out, we talked about a public scoping, which I assumed was way before the public hearings that we're going to have once we're finished doing all of the board review. And now from what Kathleen just asked you, it sounds like the public hearings should come are sort of the same as the public scoping, that they're going to happen before the draft DIS. Am I confused? Are they two different things I'm talking about? Because I know you said it's best if we have the public, if we present a code that's pretty much where we think the public wants us to go with it, so there's not a lot of changes. So that brings us back to right after 5A, where it says conduct the public scoping. So is that public scoping the same as the public hearings that we're planning on after the code is done? Or am I just messing this whole thing up?
No, the public scoping is just to define what's going to be studied in the environmental impact statement. And so I think you want to have the action itself in a place where the village board is comfortable with introducing it to the public and with having the public tear it apart. And they will have the public will have the added advantage of having the rationale for why the code update process has resulted in the documents that are being presented as part of the secret review process.
So then you've got sort of a public record and a process record of this was the logic that built this document that will now be
Yes.
taken forward to the more detailed environmental review that helps us meet state thresholds. We've all hashed this out together and agreed that this is how we're comfortable with these setbacks or this site plan, this subdivision process, et cetera, et cetera. And now we take that agreed set of local regulations on to the state environmental review.
Correct. And the process here, I said there were 5 actual steps in the secret review process for an environmental impact statement. And the first one is simply the scoping process, where you identify what's going to be studied as far as what are the potential impacts of the adoption of the code amendments. Okay, that goes out for public comment. And the public's going to come back and they're going to tell you what they like and what they don't like. And many people may not even say anything about the environmental impact statement. They may only comment on the zoning or on, some other aspect of the code provisions that are being presented. But the village board will have the opportunity to prepare a response to each of those comments and to make changes that you feel are warranted based upon the public input on the draft environmental impact statement and the zoning and other code provisions, because those will all be part of the document. They will have to be included as an appendix. The entire code process, all of those that are subject to seeker are going to have to be part of the environmental impact statement. So everyone will have not only the code provisions, but also the assessment of impacts of those code provisions in the draft environmental impact statement. And the public comment on that has a defined period. It can be a minimum of 30 days, but it can go on for 3 months, 6 months, whatever you feel is necessary in order to gather all of the public comments on both the code provisions as well as the environmental impacts. And then if there are any changes that are warranted to the code as a result of the public comment, that then is incorporated into a final environmental impact statement.
Got it.
Okay. And that's where you basically say, okay, we've assessed the potential environmental impacts of the code update process. We've gone out to get public input on that. Here's our response to that. response number one. We like the way this is. There was a reason why we identified this particular code provision, and we're going to stick with it. Or you've made a good comment. We understand the concerns. We've made the following changes. And those changes and that response then become the final environmental impact statement. So at that point, because you would be holding a public hearing, if it happens this way, you would be holding a public hearing on the draft environmental impact statement and those public hearings that you talked about, Marie. So you would have a consolidated hearing process. Okay. You would close the public hearing on the environmental impact statement, but keep the other public hearings open because you have, so, I mean, you could close them, but at this point in the process, most communities will close the public hearing on the draft environmental impact statement, keep the other public hearings open because you're making changes to those documents in response to the public input that's been made. Okay. And you keep that public hearing open as long as you feel it's necessary. And you could keep the hearing open on the draft EIS as well if you felt that there was something that really required a lot of massaging, so to speak. Okay, with the wording, wordsmithing the various parts of it, or perhaps certain concepts that have been proposed as part of the code update process. And so once you're relatively comfortable that you've addressed the comments, that you've been responsive to the public input, you made your revisions to that document, you then incorporate those into a final environmental impact statement, you adopt that document, and then that document becomes a public document that's also subject to public review and public consideration. There's no further public hearings that are necessary on the final environmental impact statement, but some communities will go and take an extra measure, and actually they will hold another public hearing on the final environmental impact statement. Okay. And so once that process has run, then there's one more step in the Secret process, and that's the final one down here, number 12, where you prepare a finding statement. And the finding statement is a summary of the entire Secret review process. What it was that you identified in the way of environmental impacts of the action. What's the mitigation? What are the alternatives that you considered as part of the action? What are the final documents that you feel are in a form that's ready for adoption by the village board? And that becomes your finding statement. And so once you prepare and file that finding statement, then you're free to adopt the code provisions that are on the table. So that's pretty much a snapshot of the Secret review process. There's a lot of little nuances to it along the way. There's some basic shifting of things that can happen during the process. But that's the overall outline of what Seeker says needs to be done in order to create a record that you followed both the substance and the process of the Seeker regulations.
So at some point, once we're past, I'm asking, I'm not saying, at some point, once we're past initial public review and we have taken into consideration public comment and recommendation on the draft code, we update it, we begin the Seeker process, we begin the scoping portion. At some point, there will be a parallel process with the EIS and the continuing refinement of the code, because as you go through the EIS, there may be points at which you have to go back based on comment, you have to go back into the code, make changes that move you forward in the EIS process? Because
Yes.
it sounded like you were saying at some point you're consolidating the hearing related to the revised draft code and the EIS itself. That process, those two questions can be asked in one consolidated hearing. Respond to the revised draft code and respond to the draft EIS.
I thought my understanding kind of was from listening to you, Ted, was that the scoping, that basically the public hearing on the code itself acts as the scoping, although they're set as two different processes, I guess. But during the public hearing, that's actually a scoping process also because of comments or whatever is brought up during that?
Well, no, the scoping process is not considered a part of the public hearing process that's required for the code updates. All right. That is something that would happen during the draft environmental impact statement, where the public hearings that are required for the zoning changes and any other parts of the code update that also require public hearings, those would be the hearings that are consolidated with the public hearing on the draft environmental impact statement. Okay, so don't confuse the scoping process with the hearing process that's required for the code. It's a predecessor to that. I think in order to do the scoping properly, it's going to mean examining the two different documents that are going to inform the public as to what is being proposed by the village board. And that's number one as far as the code process is concerned. And the second one is how the village board intends to study the environmental impact of actually adopting those code provisions.
So if we made changes to the draft code based on public feedback, we would then have to revise the environmental impact statement, but not the scoping that's already been done?
No, you wouldn't need to go back to doing scoping on
Just-
that. Once the scoping has been established, that becomes your roadmap to how you prepare your draft environmental impact statement. And the public input that you get on the environmental impact statement and the public input that you get as part of the code update process, it's going to be mixed all together. And you're going to resolve that in the final environmental impact statement, where you show your responsiveness to the public by incorporating changes to the code update, and simultaneously through a narrative in that final environmental impact statement, describe how you've made the changes and why you've made those changes and provide the justification for it.
Ted, would it be possible to modify the flow chart to insert the activities of the code review, the public hearing for the code,
That would be helpful.
and then to show how that then flows into whatever other boxes that exist? I think a second thing that would be very helpful is if you could provide us with public scoping document so that we understand what might be involved.
Okay.
At that step, you mean?
With just the concept of public scoping.
Mhm.
What does a
What it
public
involves.
scope look like?
Yep. What is it involved?
Yeah, if you
Okay.
happen to have one, that would be very helpful, particularly if you have one that has to do with another municipality's code.
Okay.
And it would be ideal if you had the EIS, whether it's the draft or the final, that went along with that. I think that would help inform us as to whether or not these two activities can be performed in parallel, or whether they have to be joined at the hip.
Okay.
Okay. One other thing. When we provided our project timeline to NYSERDA. We had the public hearings prior to the secret. So that's what NYSERDA will be looking for. Of course, I can go back to NYSERDA and say, I'd like to change the date or whatever without changing the end date. The end date is kind of hard.
So when you did the timeline for NYSERDA and you assumed that there would be a public hearing on the code update before you even began the secret process, was there any sort of guidance that NYSERDA provided to you at that time about the process?
No, not at all.
Not at all. Okay.
Right, the draft code amendments are to be completed by, I think it's 2Q 2021. The public meetings and review documentation, I think, is Q3 2021. And the secret documentation is at the same time, or Q4. I can't remember. I don't have the dates right in front of me. I have the old contract in front of me.
Okay.
So there was a delay from when the public meetings were held until when the secret documentation was completed. And the delay was 1 quarter, which in looking at this, certainly it seems to me there has to be some concurrent work being done to achieve secret completion 1 quarter after the public hearings on the code.
Okay.
Okay. And what I have done, in addition to sending you the documents, the red line and the accepted version, I've, for those chapters that I've sent to you, I've gone through each of the changes to that code chapter and have pulled it out so that there's a summary of what specific changes were made to those chapters.
Okay.
Which should help with scoping.
Yeah.
I would think.
Yes. Yes, it will, because, essentially what we're going to be looking at, there are no physical impacts on the environment that will be reviewed as part of this code update process. Because this is all done on a more generic or a more conceptual basis, because you're dealing with policies, you're dealing with changes in regulations. So these don't have any direct impact on things like land, air, and water. Where they do have an effect is on the potential to change the character of the community or have an effect on population patterns and growth and those sorts of things.
And
So
land
those
use.
are going to be the focus of the environmental impact statement. So it's typically for a, there are other things like affordable housing that are related to the socioeconomic changes that may occur. So these are the kinds of things that typically get reviewed as part of the environmental impact statement for code changes like this, and not things like the impact on water and air and land and archaeology and things like that. Unless it's a beneficial impact, if there was some change to the historic district requirements or the historic district review board in the way that they file, they process applications, that could have a beneficial impact, for instance.
Well, one change that is occurring, which you'll be very familiar with, an LWRP requires a waterfront review law. So that will be that is in fact a new chapter in the code, and that addresses scenic views.
Okay. And these are the kinds of things that are highlighted in there that are discussed in the environmental impact statement. And it's hard to gauge, how big a document it would be, but I think at this point, given that this is a fairly complicated process, I think really it makes a lot of sense to go through and do the full environmental impact statement process and not to do a negative declaration.
Right.
I think there are risks involved in adopting, in preparing an environmental assessment form and simply adopting a negative declaration. When you have something that is as comprehensive as this code update process is, and the fact that it's a type 1 action, which doesn't require an environmental impact statement, but it makes it more likely that you should be preparing an environmental impact statement. I think it just makes more sense to go through and to do the fullest process that you can. And in that way, you'll have, I think at the end of the day, a much more supportable decision that you can feel more assured fully meets the letter of the seeker regulations.
You're also more likely in that extended process to identify areas that need strengthening. I mean, it just seems logical to me that you would do the full
Yes.
as well.
Yes. And I think it's an indication on the part of the village board that you're committed to engaging residents of the village in this process to make sure that their voices are heard. And I think that's an important part of the environmental impact statement process, which is absent if you were to simply issue a negative declaration, because there is no public input or public review process that's typically done in support of a negative declaration. Basically you're saying there's no adverse impacts. So why do we need the public involved? We're just going to go ahead with this and that's that. And that's fine for some things where there are no impacts, and you can support that kind of a decision, but it's much harder to support a decision on something that, is the first time in almost 20 years that there's been this kind of a change made to the village code. And it's worthwhile, I think, taking the time to go through this process and to get out these documents so members of the interested public have an opportunity to be able to comment.
Yeah. I will send everybody a copy of Ted's flowchart after our meeting tonight.
Thank you.
And also I should mention that the part 1 environmental assessment form that was prepared, this is a draft document at this point. I welcome any further comments from any one of you on that document. If you feel that they're warranted, changing the description of the action, for instance. I don't know, Marie, did you send out the first one and the second one?
Yes, I sent out the second one
Okay.
later this afternoon after I was able to read it.
Oh, okay. Okay, good. Yeah, well, I had added to the description of the action because I tried to fit it all into a little box that just didn't work for this kind of thing, and that was a mistake. So I simply attached a new, what they call a section F, which explains things that you don't have room in the form to be able to answer at that location.
Right. I should point out that Ted's in section F, the second paragraph, it contains the objectives of the comprehensive plan, which in my mind were aspirational and not necessarily, certainly not necessarily functions that the village could specifically implement. So if you're questioning the 7 objectives there, that's where they came from.
Marie, you've raised a really good point. One of the assessments of impacts is the ability of the code update to be consistent and in conformance with the comprehensive plan, because New York State village law does require that any new changes to the land use controls within the village be done in accordance with the comprehensive plan. So one of the roles of the environmental impact statement would be to articulate exactly how the proposed code amendments are consistent with that comprehensive plan. And sometimes you're going to have statements that are very general, broad, overall statements of village preferences. That's what a comprehensive plan is. Basically, it's the comprehensive plan really that sets the stage for the code update. That's simply a means of implementing the village's comprehensive plan. But it's the comprehensive plan that the courts look to for guidance.
And what you'll find in some of the code chapters are specific references to the comprehensive plan and how they have affected that particular chapter.
Good.
For example, in land subdivisions, we have now inserted sidewalks as a requirement for a site plan.
Okay, great.
Are we going through the EAF this evening, or?
A suggestion, since we're an hour and a half into our normal 2-hour meetings, why don't people review the EAF, the version I sent this afternoon, and provide comments? I will provide you with Ted's email address so that you can send your comments to the village board and to Ted.
Sounds good.
Okay, and then so we will review the EAF at a different time. What I think is important for tonight is to pass the resolution on identifying the village board as the lead agency.
And again, that does not
Start the clock.
set up any kind of time clock for us, right?
No, it does not. It does not. It merely says that you've done the preliminary steps that are required in the seeker review process that really begin the process. You identify the fact that the village board is the only agency that has the ability to be able to adopt the code update amendments, that there's no other agency that has any sort of approval authority over this. You classify the action as type 1. And basically it just says, okay, anything we do from henceforward is related now or has to relate to the seeker review process as well.
So I'm sorry, because Heidi and I are getting inserted mid flow here.
Mm-hmm.
Has the classification already happened? Has the board already voted on a classification, or are we doing that as well as identifying lead agency tonight?
That's incorporated into the draft resolution that I prepared.
It is a single resolution to classify as type 1 and declare lead agency status.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. I didn't want to bowl you over with too many documents, but just to bring your attention to 2 other things. There's a document that the DEC updates from time to time. They call it the Secret Cookbook. It basically, if you have questions on seeker, it does go through and it provides, step by step. And they do it in kind of a hokey way, with these little illustrations and everything of the seeker process. So if you have any questions about that, that's a simpler way to be able to understand the seeker process. If you're really interested in this, there's also a 200-some page seeker handbook that the state has produced. And it came out, this year because they revised the regulations a couple of years ago, and they update the seeker handbook that basically provides answers to just about any question that you can possibly have on the seeker review process. But it's a complex process, and there's a lot of questions that do come up in the whole review process. So if you're interested in that, I can always send you one or both of these documents if you'd like to know more about them.
So if
Can
we
you-
vote, I'm sorry, just a very, very fast, just to be sure I'm clear. If we vote tonight to classify and declare lead agency, this document we're going to come back to and finalize. It stays in draft form this evening, the EAF. I'm asking that question because I had a question about interested agencies. Do we need to lay all of that out tonight, or can we simply begin with classifying and identifying lead agency?
You can begin with simply classifying and beginning with the lead agency. I think the identification of interested agencies will be an important one, and you can do that at any time. Simply declaring yourself the lead agency and classifying the action, there's no obligation that you then file these documents with anybody other than yourself. It's a resolution. It becomes a resolution of the village board. And so you're not yet at a point where you need to begin to send out notices and that sort of thing, because there's no other agency that can compete with you for lead agency.
Got it.
Ted, can you send me the documents you referred to?
Yes,
Great.
I'll send
Thank
it. Okay.
You want the hokey one, Marie, or the other?
Yeah, all of the above.
Okay. Okay.
Is there
So-
anything else you'd like to ask Ted, or we'll get into the, we'll do the resolution. Is there anything else for Ted though, up to this point? Nope.
Thank you for patiently answering a zillion questions.
I get them all the
Thanks, Ted.
time. There's a lot of questions, and so consider this, the first session on this. There'll be lots more as we get along and go through the process.
Okay, thank you for all your work. Thank you, Marie.
Thank you, Ted.
Okay. Well, I'm glad to help, and certainly if anything else comes up, let me know, Marie. I'll send those to you. I also have a note to myself to revise the flow chart, to integrate how that works with the whole process of holding the public hearings on the local laws and so forth, that are being considered here, and I'll take care of that and get these to you.
That'd be terrific. Thank you,
And
Ted.
the scoping also, a little
Yeah,
bit more
right,
information on the scoping as well,
Right.
what that entails.
Okay, thanks.
Okay,
Have a good evening.
so let's see. I gotta get out of sharing the screen. So let me see how I do that. Can I just close this? I don't know if I can just close it or not. Let me just try that.
There you go.
Okay, there you go. Good. Okay. All right, if there's anything else, let me know. Otherwise, I guess I'll sign off.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Ted.
Bye.
Thanks very much.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Nice
you.
to meet you.
Okay,
Thanks.
bye-bye.
Okay, so I'll make a motion to establish the village board as a lead agency. Take what action?
Seconded.
Okay, so this is a roll call. So adoption of the village code amendments, the name of the action. I made the motion and Kathleen seconded.
No,
Where
I
is
just
it?
said.
Heidi
Heidi
seconded.
second.
It did? Okay, sorry. Whereas the Village Board of Trustees is considering adoption of the comprehensive set of amendments to the Village Cold Spring Code, Putnam County, New York, and whereas Part 1 Full Environmental Assessment Form EAF dated December 11, 2020 was prepared to address adoption of the code amendment. And whereas after comparing the thresholds contained in 6 NYCRR 617.4 and 5, the Village Board of Trustees has determined that the proposed action is a type 1 action that meets the thresholds found in 617.4B2. And whereas after examining the EAF, the Village Board of Trustees has determined that there are no other involved and or federal agencies on this matter. The Village Planning Board and the Putnam County Planning Department are both designated interested agencies under SECRA. Now therefore be it resolved that the Village of Cold Spring Board of Trustees hereby declares itself lead agency for the review of this action. be it further resolved that a determination of significance will be made at such time as all information has been reviewed by the village board to enable it to determine whether the action will or will not have a significant effect on the environment.
Just one thing, the form that Ted said today, the revised EAF, has a date of December 15th instead of December 11th.
Thank you, Fran.
Okay, with that modification or editing, can we have a roll call?
Trustee Bender,
Aye.
trustee Early,
Yes,
trustee Foley,
Aye.
trustee Murphy,
Yes.
Mayor Morandi.
Aye. Resolution was officially adopted.
Mhm.
Thank you. Thank you, Marie, for all your work in coordinating this with Ted. Very helpful.
Thank you, Marie. Yeah.
Yes, thanks.
Okay, moving along, we have the tree board presentation. Is Jen still with us or just coming in?
Hi, Jen.
Hi, Jen.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Aye.
Are you ready for another presentation?
Sure, go for it. Yours will be a lot
Mine
easier, I
will
think.
only be 5 to 10 minutes, so no worries about tonight. Thank you for letting me speak today. Is it okay if I share my screen too? Because I have photos to show you while I talk, which is more
Sure.
interesting.
Sure.
Love photos.
Desktop one. How do I do this? Desktop. Can't share. Okay. Whoops. Hold on. Okay, starting at the beginning. Thank you for letting me speak to you tonight. I'm speaking to you on behalf of every member of the board. I just wanted to give you guys a quick summary because we have finished the tree grant project.
congratulations.
Actually, it finishes tomorrow, but this report that I'm giving you is one of the requirements. So I'm going to give it to you and hopefully it will be fun and positive. And it requires no work from you all. So here we go. The project was called the Village of Cold Spring Priority Street Tree Maintenance Project. This is the wrap-up report. It was funded by a grant of almost $50,000 by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation Community Forestry Program. And we thank everyone in that department and the state for giving us these funds and allowing all these great things that I'm about to explain to happen. The street tree maintenance program was designed to increase, the grant project was designed to increase public safety, lengthen the life of our public trees and support their long-term health, and help the village, you all, with our help, the tree board's help, really start seriously implementing a better program of annually maintaining our trees. We have been buried for the first several years as a tree board under a huge backlog of maintenance needs, including most of them hazards, very pressing maintenance needs. And we couldn't get to a lot of the fun things or even get out our head above waters to plan for sort of annual maintenance of things that we're planting and the things that we need until we get a lot of this backlog out of the way. So this grant really helped us sort of dig out in the very beginning, basically. So it was a 2-year project, began in January 2019 and it ends tomorrow. And I'm starting with this slide, which is from Arbor Day 2016, which is, you'll see Mayor Morandi there with his cap on the right-hand side. This photo to me kind of represents in 2016, when we were starting to think about applying for the grant, some of the problems that were happening at the time that we were addressing. This was also before all of the other sidewalk grant project that the village did was completed, as you'll notice with the blacktop in the foreground, et cetera. But you can see a little tree on the left-hand side here. This is actually the second tree that was at that site. It got run over completely run over. And
Right.
this tree got completely run over. The tree before it got killed. And we are planting this tree here on Arbor Day in the village, but this tree has a lot of problems that it's going to have to face as it gets older, not least of which it's surrounded on all sides by cement and blacktop, so the water can't reach its roots great. It doesn't have any protection from dog pee. It is going to need some pruning in the coming years, etc. And all of our street trees in Cold Spring sort of face these same kinds of issues. And that's what this grant was trying to address. So this is before the grant. This is a little tree that has hope. And some of the other sort of problems we were trying to address is water permeability in the furniture zone, which is like the utility zone right under the wires along a lot of our streets, especially Main Street Business District, which has a lot of cement. We're hoping to encourage a lot of our street trees to root in that zone instead of rooting under the sidewalk that we walk under and heaving the sidewalk. So in conjunction with the previous sidewalk grant, we left some of these areas open in the hopes that we would get a grant to do some kind of permeable paving here and improve the life and the longevity of our trees. So here's some before pictures of those areas left open on Main Street, and there some erosion. We had a lot of problems like compaction from people walking and crazy roots and circling. These are all Main Street problems. And Fran, on your street, these are
My
good
tree.
examples of, we have a lot of tree pits in Cold Spring that are teeny, teeny, tiny, and some of them are even so small that the tree is about to grow, the trunk is about to sort of get girdled by the sidewalk. So part of the grant project involved widening street tree pits here and there when it was prudent, the most necessary ones, and addressing, pruning and maintenance needs from our aging tree stock. So the grant itself achieved several successes, which I'm sure you guys have all seen. A lot of them are visible. It increased the water permeability and rooting space adjacent to our most stressed Main Street Business District street trees by enlarging the pits and installing pavers in the area. So here's an early example right next to Village Hall, Catherine's restaurant. This is an area of the street that had a brand new sidewalk put in from a previous grant that you guys worked hard to do. And then we left this furniture zone area in between open, hoping one day that it would look like this. And here it is. We planted a couple trees and we have the permeable pavers there. So it's a little before and after. The tree pit guards were another part of the grant project that got put in along Main Street. Many tree pit guards, and we even put a few in at the very end of the grant when we had the last little bit of money left over. They help decrease compaction around these trees where people this is high traffic area, so people walk and compact the soil, and that decreases the oxygen content in the soil and then kills the roots basically. So having a guard around the main rooting zone keeps dogs from peeing there and reduces compaction. And we installed guards in these permeable pavers in a lot of the areas on Main Street. You can see here's in front of Old Souls. My favorite thing about this is that people have adopted these areas and have started to put in creative gardens. This is the second type of guard we put in, both guard designs. One is a recycled HDPE, which was made by City Tree Guards in the city. And most of the guards are metal that were made locally by our local business, RNG Wrought Iron. This is the one made by City Tree Guards. Here's the RNG Wrought Iron ones. And this is in front of C&E Paint. The highway department did a great job putting in all of these pavers. And since we had people start adopting these areas, we held in collaboration with the Cold Spring Chamber of Commerce a tree pit gardening workshop in May 2019, which was very successful. I don't have all the materials here, but it had a list of things that do well in these pits, and it gave people some information about how to plant things that won't compete with trees and how not to damage tree roots when they're planting, et cetera. And we had a lot of great interest. Here's us in the firehouse talking to the crowd that came, members of the tree board. And here's us looking, we toured Main Street and looked at some pits and got some ideas. Fran, I think you're in that one, that they're on the right. We also collaborated with volunteers from the Cold Spring Village Shady Lane campaign on a project to install metal tree tags on all of our trees, all of our street trees. Do I have a picture of that? Yeah, here we go. Here's Charlie, our tree board member, Charles Day. The metal tags look like this. Kathleen was one of the Shady Lane members that was helping us out on doing our park trees and our street trees. So they all have new numbers now. They're kind of rational numbers. They go down in a certain way and up in a certain way. And they're on the actual physical tree. So when we communicate about a tree, so let's say, Dave, you were wondering about a tree that had a red ribbon around it. It was tree number 24. And you can just email me and say, hey, tree number 24 has a red ribbon around it. Why is that? And I know exactly what you're talking about right away. It also helps members of the public if they're have lodging a complaint about a dangerous limb or something like that. They can refer specifically to the number of the tree and we know which one it is. I'm hoping someday to have an interactive online map that the public can engage with and learn more information about the tree in front of their house, for example. Could also be a way to where members of the public could, submit a pruning request or, just sort of facilitate the conversation and information sharing about these trees that belong to all of us. And these numbers would be an integral part of that map because they're the physical locator on each tree, basically. So tree tags, tree pit guards, widening tree pits, and the tree grant also included pruning about 30 street trees. This is one of them that got pruned last week. Both of these oaks actually in Waterfront Park got pruned last week. And as well as this row of oaks that are across from Food Town and Dunkin' Donuts in front of all those residences, which is a nice row of oaks we have that have been pruned by trucks a lot over the years. So they have a lot of jagged, broken things. And now they're limbed up and the dead wood's removed and they're hopefully will be there for many, many more years because of this grant. We also removed 12 diseased, dying, or rapidly declining trees, which is a lot of trees from the village, which was controversial, as you all know. But that has really reduced our stress level and allowed me to sleep a little bit better at night, and has begun sort of the process of repairing and planting and planning for planting better trees in these places where we lost them. This is another tree that was pruned. This is on Main Street. It's kind of hard to see, but there's a broken limb on the front. This tree sheds all the time, and it was pruned for health and for safety, both last week. Some challenge, so we accomplished a lot with this grant, including the pruning work, the takedown work. We ground some stumps and all of the sort of beautification and pavers and things, tree pit guards on Main Street. We did encounter a few challenges that I just wanted to mention. The biggest challenge, and something for you guys as a board to keep in mind in future years, is the uncertainty that we encountered surrounding unmarked village property lines. And I know this is an ongoing problem in the village that touches a lot of different projects. Hold on, sweetie pie, I'm giving a presentation. But there were many trees that could not be tagged yet, and also that we removed from our pruning list because they occupy this gray zone and we weren't 100% sure if they were village trees, because the village has property lines that we know to be the property lines, but we don't know where they are exactly in some cases, and our records don't show, or there's no marker. There hasn't been a recent survey and there's no marker on the ground. So, I had the thought someday in the future to try to write a grant to, survey the village property. It would be really useful. I know because I've seen the Main Street survey from, the subway all the way up to the stoplight. Actually, it goes all the way up farther almost. From the sidewalk project. The Main Street properties were surveyed there, the village properties on Main Street. So I know the property lines there, but something similar could be done on the side streets and around a few nebulous properties, and it would give us a better sense of, what our responsibilities are, where more village trees are or less village trees are, and would answer a lot of questions and confusion when we get requests from the public to prune trees and we're not sure if they're a public tree or not, et cetera. So that's something to keep in mind. And the other significant challenge we encountered was COVID, of course, as we all have encountered that. We had a sort of a community outreach portion of our grant that got partially completed when we did the tree pit gardening workshops, et cetera. But then when COVID hit, our final sort of taking stock of the successes of the grant kind of outreach, public outreach, had to be moved online. So we're in the process of using the Village's social media account, our tree board website, the Shady Lane campaign's social media account, et cetera, to reach people in their homes and give presentations like this. Basically, people can watch remotely. So in conclusion, there are several long-term benefits to the village of this work that I think are fairly obvious, but I'm going to state them because they're good to keep in mind. The pruning work that occurred over the last few weeks helped protect many of our mature trees from disease and helps them resist storm damage, which we significantly have a lot of storms. We're about to have another one in the village. When trees are able to resist storm damage better, they can live longer lives, and we're all safer, obviously. The removals of dying and dead trees helped increase public safety. And as I said before, begins this longer process of replanting and repairing. And now that we have a tree board, we're working on a new recommended planting list specific to the village. So hopefully we'll be planting species of trees that are not going to present as many challenges down the road to the tree board 30 years from now or 40 years from now, which is what happened when the Norway maples were all planted about that long ago, which were wonderful trees at the time, and they're so hardy, but you know, they have a lot of problems now. They're all coming to their end of their lives around the same time. So clearing this whole backlog by pruning and removing will make our tree advisory board work in the future much easier to keep up with. And the experience itself has given all of us who are volunteers like a much better sense of what the maintenance costs of each of these kinds of trees are. So it's kind of gotten our feet very wet, actually, in terms of understanding how much group pruning costs, for example, so that we can propose a more realistic annual plan or biannual plan to keep up with this pruning. So it will help us sort of financially assess things in the future, which I thought was an unexpected but good benefit of doing this grant project. The pit widening and paver installation will help with the health of the trees and protect the longevity of our sidewalks, especially a lot of our new sidewalks, by increasing the rooting space and encouraging roots to grow in the furniture zone under the sort of water permeable areas and not try and get their water right by growing right underneath the cement slabs. We'll see, time will tell if that will help. Overall, this was a very successful and a satisfying project. The very visible changes on Main Street and the removal of pruning work and the tree tagging have all helped engage the public in a larger discussion about our community forest and its health. And that was probably the best part of the project for all of the members on the tree board who worked on it, was talking to people who saw a lot of these changes happening and who got engaged and made a tree pit garden, or were worried about the pruning that was happening and wanted, emailed us about it. And the engagement from our fellow residents was very heartening. It was very clear that we have a lot of people in Cold Spring that care about trees, and a lot of people who are annoyed by trees, as we all are sometimes, who who we began a conversation with or continued a conversation with to try and sort of help all of us take care of all of these trees better and sort of mitigate risks and also make them live longer and healthier lives. So these are some examples of our social media. But in conclusion, I just wanted to thank the mayor and the board of trustees, Jeff and Michelle and Bugsy and his whole crew, and the Shady Lane campaign volunteers, the Chamber of Commerce members, and also the Tree for Life volunteers and donors who helped us plant 20 trees right in the middle of this grant, not with grant money, but with their own labor and their own donations. This tree grant was not a tree planting grant. It was a maintenance grant, but their fundraising right in the middle of when we were doing this grant really sort of spirited us by planting 20 trees last November. It was great. So thank you to them and to my fellow tree board members who have hung in there for a long time as this project completed over 2 years. So thanks, that's my presentation.
Hey, Jen, can you, I think you should name your board members, the people
Oh.
that, so for all our
Sure.
Zoom people.
My fellow board members are Corey Reisterer and Charles Day and Taro Aitaka. And I think actually Gordon Robertson was on the board when we started applying for this grant, so I should thank Gordon as well. And Tony Bardis, who is also on the board with us now. So thank you to all of them for their work on this and their support along the way.
Like, I want to applaud.
Jen, thank you so much. You guys did such a
It's a
phenomenal
great
job.
presentation.
Thanks.
Yes, thank
It's a
you.
service to the village. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. I think I'm always amazed at how many, the village just really basically runs on volunteers, and it's
Yes.
incredible. It's great, to have somebody that spearheads something and is that passionate about it, and hopefully that'll continue on. I mean, just this last week, the rec and how they kind of addressed COVID in Santa and the people that came down and helped there. So it's always heartening, and I guess it's this time of year, so good things happen, and taking care of our trees and finally getting a handle on them has been great. So thank you so much. Thank you, board members, for me, and
Yes.
have a merry.
All right, thank you.
That's
Very
your
much,
family.
Jen. Take
Bye,
care.
thank you.
Congratulations.
Bye. Thank you. Well, that was delightful.
Oh, awesome.
That was
So
great.
much less
Let's just
depressing
end
than
it.
Seeker.
I didn't even have to, my mind didn't have to get all, confused.
Nice, simple, good stuff. Okay, let's see. A discussion on the remainder of our meetings for December. Heidi had sent us something reminding us of the Jewish holiday, and I apologize for not realizing that. I think actually my wife Stephanie was saying that their last planning board meeting that they were planning one for the 23rd or 24th without realizing it. So things happen. It wasn't intentional, and so my apologies. We
No,
won't
no,
have
no
on
need.
that date. That's for sure. Next time, please just call. Just let us know. And it's just an oversight, and they'll definitely accommodate. So
Appreciate
with that said, we do have, well, what dates do we have left here? So there would be nothing this week. Following week, we have the Tuesday, which I believe we're gonna have a meeting, or no, up to the board.
We have 2 Tuesdays left in the month of December, the 22nd, which is our normal 4th Tuesday, and the 29th. One thing to keep in mind, we don't have all of the bills in yet. So Michelle may have to have a audit and bill approval at some point between now and the end of the year.
I mean, I'm good for either date. So
I'm
if
around.
we have-
for me.
If we have time to do some code stuff, maybe we should try to squeeze in some code.
I'm around and willing to meet. I would just, obviously, on the 29th, we're between 2 holidays. So I hope we don't take up any business on the 29th. That would be the code up. That would be a code review, right?
Oh,
There's a workshop, in other words, a workshop for code on the 29th, if we were to do that.
yes. Yeah, that's up to,
I'm fine with that. And like you
Fine.
said, we could just restrict it to just that and not have, a lot of our workshops turn into not workshops. So we'll have to make sure we avoid that and just push stuff off for a little bit.
I mean, is it something that you want to do? Are you wanting to meet that holiday week, Dave?
Which
I'm
day?
not sure if you're feeling, if you want to meet or don't want to meet that week, the 29th.
I personally will meet the 22nd and 29th, and but I don't have a life, so.
Nobody does right now. We may as well talk about the code.
You guys have family, so, right there. So up to you guys. If we do, we can just do, if we have some late business or something we have to sign or something that's time sensitive, we can take care of and not get into anything heavy, and just and then we can just work on some codes. If that's
that works for me.
Fine.
That
Okay.
okay. So Jeff, the 22nd, 29th, Let's start
Second
7
and
o'clock.
29th, okay.
Is
7,
it 7 o'clock?
whatever time.
No,
works.
6:30.
6:30?
Well,
Yeah,
last week at reorg,
Right.
we voted to change this meeting times to 7 o'clock.
then let's not do 2 weeks in a row at 7 o'clock till 9 o'clock. No,
What's
Yeah.
that? Why? What?
Can we do 6:30 for code stuff or? I don't
Anything
care.
we want, as long as we notify it. I don't see, what's the difference between 6:30 and 7?
9 o'clock, I'm sleeping.
Okay,
There's no difference. Just last week during reorg,
right, yeah.
you voted to change the meeting times to 7 o'clock.
Yeah,
Right,
that was good.
and
That was because
actually-
they. Go ahead.
Well, I was just, for two of us do have kids in the house, and it's slightly easier for me. That half hour makes a big difference. I'm happy to do either 6:30 or 7, but it does make the flow of the evening a little easier having that half hour.
Yeah, I'm good with whatever.
I'm good with it there. We can, you want to have one at 6:30 and one at 7?
Whoa,
Works for me.
What's that?
whoa.
Getting wild.
Hey,
What about if we did the 29th, since it's the holiday week, if we did the 29th at 6:30 and kept the more regular meeting schedule on the 22nd, did that one at 7? Does that
I'm
work?
good with that.
Right.
Everyone okay with that?
That works.
Yes.
22nd at 7, 29th at 6:30.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Next was a quick discussion on COVID-19. I think Heidi sent something. I looked through it quickly, but I think that, I mean, I'm all too happy to include something like that, like at a monthly, at every meeting, if you'd like. I mean, if you'd like to just summarize what's going on with COVID and kind of remind people and where we are spiking, whatever, I'm more than happy to, include that into our agendas so people are aware. And
Is
this
it
could-
something we can put out too, like on the website and
Yeah.
other places?
We can get it on the Facebook page. You did a lot of work on that, Heidi. You did a nice job with it.
Oh,
I mean,
thank you.
I'm good with, I'll get it on the Facebook page as long as everybody takes a look and says it's good. And that works for me.
I'm good with that.
Okay. All right, I will get it. Heidi, if you don't see it up on the Facebook page, like by sometime tomorrow, just shoot me a note.
Okay.
Okay.
right.
'Cause
And
I've
Fran?
got-
When you post on the Facebook page, do you share out to other local pages?
I try to do that. The thing is, the Facebook page doesn't friend other pages because then you get all kinds of garbage in the village Facebook page that you don't really need.
Huh.
So what I do is if it hits my own Facebook page, I'll share from that point. Or if it hits your personal Facebook page, feel free to share it. I don't know, maybe I'm not doing it right. But I think you have to,
So if you follow,
if you follow, but if I
you follow
follow,
another local page, then
Right.
you should be able to share
but
to
I
that
don't,
page.
following another local page means that the village's Facebook page is going to get all the other stuff from the other local page, which is not really what that
It
that
won't
page.
come into your feed. It just means that it won't appear to the public in your feed. You may see it as the administrator, but it's not going to appear to the stuff from locals or neighbors or Cold Spring neighbors isn't going to appear in the public's
Okay.
view of our
yeah.
page.
I'll take a look and see if I can figure that one
Okay.
out. I do
If
try
you
to,
want-
I do.
If you want any help, let us know.
Okay, will do. Thank you.
And can we send it to the papers? Is that okay with everyone?
Press release.
Yeah.
You
Just,
can ask them for a press release. I don't think, I mean, it would start costing us
And we
considerable.
could do a press release or maybe a letter to the editor.
yeah, what,
That
what,
just comes from the Board of Trustees.
I like it.
great.
Right, and I'll send out an email blast from the website and post it on the Board of Trustees page and our page.
Right on.
Thanks. Yeah.
Heidi, is it finalized now the way it looks? So I
As
could
long
just
as
vote?
everyone else is happy with it, I'm happy with it. With this version, the only thing to note is there are some links in it. So if it's going to be printed without the links, I might just make a note so that like where it's linked to micro clusters, for example, I'll just write out where that's being linked to. So it's
Yeah,
clear.
if you put that, because sometimes when you put a link on Facebook, it opens up that page.
Yeah,
Gives
okay.
you a
So I
picture of
will,
that, so, okay.
I'll edit that and resend to everyone. And I'm happy to do this on a monthly basis or however, you know, seems worthwhile as things change and, you know, as the vaccine becomes available or whatever it is.
Very good, thank you.
Do we provide on the village website? I haven't tootled around recently. Do we have links to the county health department and the state health department?
Yes.
Yeah, we do. Okay.
Yeah. I don't know that this county is putting out
It's
other
just a
than
dashboard.
numbers.
Yeah, it's more useful. The state page is much more useful than the
Yes.
county page.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
More,
I
and
mean,
more up to date.
I think one thing that I looked for as a citizen is just like the nearest testing centers. I feel like I was always asking people, and things do change. So I think having that.
Having not only them, but what their, like some require, I believe, you need to call ahead, others you
Yes,
can just go
right.
there. So.
Yeah.
Just
Well,
as a, oh, go ahead, Heidi.
I was going to say, at least here, like we're listing the phone number or the website so people can at least find that out too.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most important things.
Yeah, I found out with the Anthony Wayne, if you go on the state website and fill out the form, they just send you an appointment for someplace in Westchester. But if you actually physically call the phone number that you had in your write-up there, you get Anthony Wayne, and they're pretty open. Or you get somebody that you can say to them, I want to go to Anthony Wayne, and they seem to be pretty open with days and hours at this point.
Yeah,
What day do you want, what hour?
the phone is much more effective for getting a particular site. And Anthony Wayne also has a drive up section. That site's run by the National Guard, and it is so well run and so safe. And they channel drivers into folks with appointments, folks without. They talk to you through the closed glass,
Right,
communicate
yeah.
with signs. It's just excellent. And it's so close by.
Great.
On a related sad note, one of the contractors, one of the workers for a contractor who had been working for quite a while, is like, I believe 60, died of COVID, I think this week. Was working a few days ago and then contracted and died.
Oh my God, so fast.
Wow.
He's from Garrison, so I'm not sure. I don't know if he's from Garrison. He works for a Garrison contractor, so I don't want to give names or whatever. I'm not sure where it is, but somebody told me that today. So
Gosh.
not a good.
Yeah, infection rates here are really bad right now.
Okay, moving on to our official newspaper. We kind of tabled that. I think I sent some things out or replied. The reason you can add them as an additional, the current cannot be just our, our paper of record and handle our legal, our official paper because of circulation. At least that's my understanding. I think Jeff followed up and talked to the current, and they said that yes, they couldn't be. They don't have the circulations needed, but they could be added an additional. If we add them as an additional, that would mean that we have to everything that we send to the PCNR, we'd have to send to them. What we've been doing since I've been in office is everything that we feel is important needs to get out on a broader, to a broader audience. We put it in both papers, and I think that's worked out well. There's some stuff that's required. I don't know if we want to spend the money on both papers for that. We do try to get them in both whenever we feel it's something the public definitely needs to know or should know. Jeff just came up with some numbers. I think, what was the total, Jeff? I don't have it on me.
It was about, I don't have what it's about. It was about $1,400 in legal notices for the fiscal year that ended May 31st.
That was just for the Putnam County News.
That was just for the PCNR, just for the legal notices. And this was a little bit of a weird year because the last 3 months were COVID, and we really didn't have, other than we made some announcements regarding water bills and stuff like that. We really didn't have the legal notices. the volume that typically would have had from boards.
Well, if we're doing a periodic display ad for topics we know are of significant public interest, that seems like a smart and cost-effective way to go.
Yeah,
As
and
opposed
a
to
lot of
doing
stuff,
every-
a lot of stuff we don't have to put in the PCNR. I mean, just because there are, we don't have to, I mean, we're not required to put everything in the PCNR if we didn't want to. Legal notices, we definitely have to.
Right, and repeating meetings, you don't, but when you do have a hearing, you have to list it.
Right,
Yeah,
yes.
like our regular meeting doesn't get advertised in the paper, correct? In the PCNR?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there have been circumstances where we've advertised only in the current and not the PCNR with display ads. Not too often, but it's happened on occasion.
But not, we met all of our legal requirements. Yeah.
Yes, I'm not talking about legal notice
Yes,
advertising. I'm
exactly.
talking
I
about,
just wanted to make sure we're clear
Yeah.
that we did meet the legal requirement.
yes.
So anyone else have feelings on that? I feel we should stay the way we are and kind of monitor what we need to put into each.
Yeah, and
we're-
I suppose if they get paid circulation in the future, we can revisit. Because I think
Oh.
that was the issue, right? It was paid.
Right.
Correct.
And it's a certain, well, it's a certain, yeah, actually, I'm not sure how the current works totally. I think there are some paid, but you have to prove that it's, there's a broad circulation. So that might also have to do with it.
Well, yeah, the current, and Mike, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is the circulation is through membership fees. And the membership fees based on how research companies and whatnot define paid circulation does not meet the criteria. Now, another part of naming an official newspaper is that the Board of Trustees has to be comfortable that the paper it chooses has what's considered broad circulation throughout the village boundaries. So I think that that's another issue that would have to be addressed is what's considered broad, how does the board define broad distribution?
Number 9 now reads
No.
the current.
So
Right,
we revisit this every year at our reorg meeting. So if things change and there was circulation and current could be, then yeah, absolutely. Right now we have a limited choice. So is everyone fine leaving it as is for now?
Yes, that it's a discretion, we use our discretion with matters of interest.
And if as board members, you feel something should go in there that we're not, or you can ask at any time to have something put, whatever, we can discuss it at any meeting. So,
Cool.
okay. Next, I just wanted to have, I put the food truck on, not to discuss every little bit of it or, really get into the weeds with it. I just think, I'm not sure if we're going to get to that immediately or in the next 2 months. And, I just feel we should give that woman a call and say, we'll do our best, but we might not have an answer. I don't want to kind of corner myself for the board and saying we're going to have an answer for you and then come back in 2 months in February or something and say, well, we really didn't have a chance, or we're trying to get it together, or we just had swamped with other stuff. I don't feel like we have, as a board, we don't, and even to kind of get it together to discuss that, because I think it's a broader issue on all of the village and where we're at. We'll have the time in the next couple of months to really nail that down and give an answer, besides, that's my feeling. I just don't think we're going to have that time. I personally don't want to discuss it right away, just because there's so much else we got to take care of. We have parking, we have police policy, we've got this code update, we got Secret now, we have a lot on our plates. So
It seems to make sense to look at it in the context of a larger question and not in response to a single inquiry, right? I mean, that was an unusual inquiry. That wasn't a usual food truck inquiry. That was a 6 days a week, 8 hours a day kind of request, which is not the way that usually comes in. That's my impression. And it seems like before you respond to something like that, we would need to get information together and get some facts together so that we're not making that decision arbitrarily. So
I agree.
sounds like we need more time.
I think, yeah, I agree. And I think just that I think the bigger question is, I think, and I don't know, I think it's COVID related, but not totally, is the influx of visitors that we had. And a lot are just parking and hiking or whatever, but it's really, how the residents see the village and where we're at with, the whole picture of the village and tourism or visitors or everything, that's included in that. I think that should be part of it. And maybe that's where I honestly don't know how the whole village feels on what's going on or what happened this year, because I feel like we had like a tsunami, and I wasn't comfortable with it. I know other people aren't, but I'm not saying I know everybody or the majority of the people in the village. So I think one thing is maybe that we could concentrate on is really seeing what people want. What do the residents want? Why are you here? What would you like to see? What do you think is acceptable? And go from there. And it's not just food trucks. I think it's everything, including food trucks.
And thinking about sort of, if we find ourselves to use these quieter months when we're not with an influx of visitors, that's the only way they're quiet for this configuration of people. Thinking about how we plan for sort of worst case scenario. If we had the third weekend in October, every weekend next summer, how are we going to deal with that?
Right.
Or starting in March, starting in April. And are we ready? Is Parks ready? Are we ready with Parks? Are we ready on traffic level? Are we ready on concession? Are we ready? All that stuff. Because I think we do, yes, we are swamped right now, but March and April will get here faster than we think. And I hope that we can have some sort of sense of being prepared for another influx. COVID's not going to be gone. The vaccine it's going to take a long time for the vaccine to roll out. And I think we are likely to have big crowds again of people trying to get outside and get fresh air. And so how are we going to be ready next spring and summer?
So maybe
you're right, it's part of a bigger issue.
So maybe this is something we table till, say, the end of January, and then see, where our time constraints are at with the code, and attempt to make some planning for the spring. Would that be?
I think that's reasonable. I think it gives us a little breathing room around these holidays and getting into the new year and see where we're at.
Sounds good. And I appreciate that you will reach out to the I don't actually know if she was a village resident or a town resident.
She's actually a town resident according to, how she registered her company.
Okay, so but still, she's someone who came before us, and I appreciate that I think she would appreciate us getting back to her. So good thinking.
Okay. I think another thing tying in, and just not to drag this on a little, is like, we do have events, and you're talking about October. We had events, started having more and more events like beer fests and wine fests, and then the C Street's coming in, and C Street means, revenue that we need. But then, I couldn't imagine if C Street came in this year. It
was bigger than C Street from what I understand, right? The numbers we saw were bigger than C Street without C Street.
Right.
But not all at once, which made a huge
not all at
difference.
once. That made a difference.
As
Sure.
a Main Street merchant, I can tell you, spreading out over time does make a difference. Versus.
Okay, so let's do that towards the end of maybe the last meeting in January. We'll move ahead.
Yep.
Cool.
Okay. I have just one more thing. I talked to Larry. I don't know if you heard about. If you read the PCNR, you heard about, and it was Doug's editorial piece on what happened down at Chapeau, the little shop at the end of the street. And I have to say that, it really bothered me reading that, because I just, whether I'm not sure if it's true or not or whatever. And what it seemed to do is take bits and pieces and then go to, that it was an act of, that it was an act against the owner because he was Black. And I'm not sure exactly if that's the case from, our police officer in charge went down there and took a look at everything. The glass that was broken was on the side in the alley, and it was a crack. And he didn't feel like it was, and this may be true or not true, that it was like smashed or somebody hit it. It was like a crack across the glass. So, you know, that's one part of it. The other part, you know, that Mr. Cunningham went on to like equate this to racism was because someone would walk into the shop and turn around and walk out. And I don't know if you've done that or not, but I've done that, not because the person's of any specific color. It's because I just look in the store and say, it's not of interest to me, and I leave. But he was putting these pieces together and saying it's racism. And then it just got into this whole, you know, his whole editorial or comment on racism in the village. And yeah, I don't know. I just upset me that, you know, that's where that went, and that kind of was how he was identifying it and where we're with that. Out with that. I hope that's not the case. You know, Larry had talked to Archie, I believe is the owner of the shop, and it didn't sound like he's encountered. You know, when he talked to Larry, you know, he didn't state anything like people had said anything derogatory or come in there and done anything, you know, that you would consider racist. But that's where this kind of whole conversation went in the Putnam County News. So, you know, I just feel like we need to get a handle on some stuff. And, you know, this, like, I hope that's not the case, that somebody would find the need to smash somebody's window. But the window had a crack in it, which could be from settling. It could be a number of different things. And to just jump to conclusions and then start getting into Cold Springs history or whatever, that's, you know, I don't think that's where we should be going with this. So I just wanted to comment on that. It just really bothered me that this was in that paper and that we were, you know, discussing this and coming to conclusions the way that Mr. Cunningham did about that event, because I think it was bad investigating and a really bad journalism.
Can I jump on that, Dave? Because I read that editorial and I read it, I believe, the same way you did. And the first thing I did was I did speak to Larry. Doug Cunningham, the way I read it, said basically he spoke to Archie and he sort of insinuated that this was racism. I spoke to Larry, and Larry said to me the day of the incident, he asked Archie, was there any racist comments? Was there anything painted? Was there anything? Archie said, no, no, no. And I'm not saying that Archie has not, you know, had racism against him at other times, but not this incident. The window was cracked. I looked at the window. Seemingly, another thing that annoyed me, and I probably am going to get shot for this one, the chamber jumped all over it to help him pay for the window. And the window was not smashed, it was cracked. However, a number of months ago, Doug's Pretty Good Pub was broken into. People went in there, stole cash out of his drawer. I don't believe he got any, you know, maybe he did, but, you know, it wasn't made a big incident. He was broken into, he was smashed. It wasn't a cracked window. It was walk in the door, steal some cash. About a year ago, Joseph's jeweler was smashed in. People went in, took silver out of his place that he sells. You know, those incidents happen. Yeah, they do. It's vandalism. It stinks. It's rotten. But those incidents have happened, you know, and you know, in the incident of Archie, when Larry spoke to him, they had this conversation about whether or not it was racism. And Archie told Larry nothing looked like it was racist. So why Doug, and I'm disappointed in Doug because I usually read his editorials and I usually like them. But the way he worded this one and the way he picked up on this one, like, really annoyed me. And so, you know, so that was just, and I wasn't going to say anything. I was watching to see if there were any comments that came back on it, and there don't seem to be. But, you know, I agree with you. There's been incidents of vandalism in the village, you know, and I don't want to say it happens. It's been luckily few and far between, but they happen. Nobody smashed Archie's window. It was cracked. Nobody went there, stole anything. You know, it stinks, and I'm glad people help pay for it, but you know, it could be for any reason. It could have been a rock that blew or a tree or a wind or whatever. I don't know. Could be that somebody, I think if somebody really wanted to make a racist statement, they would have smashed the window. It wasn't smashed, but that's my 2 cents. And thank you for opening that up because it did gnaw at me.
I didn't read the article, and I don't know about the incident, but I'd say all of those incidents are pretty concerning, especially at Doug's, considering how close he is to the police station. So that might be something to follow up on with all of them, just,
Yeah.
how frequently vandalism is happening to Main Street businesses.
Well, it's not really, I mean, it's, it's not frequently. Joseph's was maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago. Doug's was a number of months ago. So it's not that it's like a lot. I mean, you don't want it to happen ever.
Right, but like say 2 in 2 months for how many businesses there are seems like
Yeah, and it wasn't even that. It's maybe 2 in a year. And whatever it is, when it's your business and it's coming out of your pocket, it stinks. It really does. Mhm.
I'm not saying that what didn't upset me is I think we should take every case as seriously. And I think if somebody has a cracked window and they feel like it was done for a certain purpose, then, the police are looking into it and there. But to jump from that immediately to racism was what I had a problem with. Wasn't the point. There was nothing there really to connect that. It has a black owner and that's it. When Doug's is broken into is because he's Irish or descent or whatever. It's almost like
well, it
reverse.
could be. I mean, we just don't know.
Well, I want to be careful. I want to be careful how we draw parallels. I know about this. I read the article. I have issues with the article that I'll come back to for a different reason, but I want to be careful that just as Doug can misrepresent Archie, we all can as well. And Archie is not here to speak for himself. So I don't know what Archie's experience was. And I don't feel comfortable with any of us representing what his experience was as a Black business owner.
I'm basing my response on our police officer going down and investigating the incident and what Doug said. That's all I
also
need
because,
right now.
and I spoke at length to Larry about this. So.
I understand, but I feel discomfort with us representing what Archie experienced or felt, regardless of what Larry's police report is. I'm just expressing my discomfort that we are representing or attempting to represent what Archie's feelings may be. So there's that.
I'm not trying to do that at all.
Well, that is my experience of this communication, which is my
communication was that Doug came to conclusions in a paper, our public paper, our official paper, that was equating a cracked window to racism.
Understood.
That was mine. It has nothing to do. I'm sure that Archie feels there's racism and he probably has had to deal with that. And I'm not putting myself into his shoes whatsoever or his feelings on this, or if it's a cracked window. What I'm saying is our official paper came out and said, there's a cracked window. Yep. This is racism. Let's go on a 3 or 4 column tear.
I understand. And what I would add,
it doesn't seem like you do understand.
I am understanding your feeling about it.
Talking about his feelings, and that's not the case. You just stated that. I'm talking about the PCNR and their reaction to a broken window.
Understood. And I would expound on it a bit to say my reaction to that article was less about the question of whether it was a racial issue or not. My issue with that editorial, I was sick to my stomach by the time I read that article, because I took umbrage to being told by the editor of the PCNR that we should be nice to each other in this village. He has never taken responsibility for the role he played in creating divisions in this village. He has never said, I acknowledge what I did. He has never said, I'm sorry to what he did. And I don't believe he has ground to stand on in this community to tell anyone how to behave or how to be kind to each other, how to be neighborly, until he owns his own role in what he did to tear apart this village from the moment he arrived until the moment Ailes died and he got the paper. I do not pretend, and I do not appreciate him pretending that none of that happened. It happened. I would like him to own it. I would like him to say, I'm sorry to this community and the people he hurt in this community. And he will never be a legitimate journalist, in my mind, in this community until he does so. I acknowledge that I did it and I'm sorry. That is a separate issue, the question of how we hold and appreciate community and behave toward each other. I don't want Archie to get lumped in with Doug's poor choices about how he lectures the rest of us on how we treat each other.
I totally agree. And I think it's another divisive, I think it's Doug showing his true colors. and once again, throwing some divisive, just starting to, it divides the community. It really does. It portrays us, badly if you believe everything in the way that whole article went. It just, that's the part that I was like really upset about.
Yes, there needs to be some deep dive on a personal level before he's allowed to lecture me.
I agree. Anyway, can we have Jen come back and give us a happy start to end this on that note? I just think, I don't know how people read that or thought that was good or bad, or if it's totally true, or that's how you add things up. It's a serious, I mean, we're in the environment we're in is, it's an intense one. And I don't think you just, put stuff like that in a paper under these, maybe never, but under the environment we're in, and everything that's happened this year and how people are wound up. It's just something you don't put in the paper unless there are some really hard facts on it or whatever. And that's just bad journalism. It's really bad. And it just like makes you think that the village is racist and there's racists all over and people are out there and whatever. And there is racism, and I'm not denying any of that. I'm just saying that's not a paper, I just think it's bad journalism to be portraying us, and in this day and time and age, the way that came across. It just was not good for, the feeling of what I really think the village is about. And anyway, I couldn't let that one rest, so sorry.
That's good eye, clearly.
So the last on the agenda, and sorry to kind of end on that one. We have the approval for bills. I don't know, does someone have that?
I've got the numbers.
Okay.
Thank you, Jeff. Jeff just sent them to me. Batch number 5835 in the amount of $53,494.15. So I make a motion to approve batch 5835 in the amount of $53,494.15.
I'll second that. Any discussion?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you for doing the work.
Anything else? We're into the 2.5 hour mark. Anything?
And just to remind everybody, there's no parking on village streets tomorrow night in anticipation of the storm.
Storm, what storm?
Are we still, folks are still to put yard debris out tonight?
Yes.
Yes.
Thanks, Jeff. I had that written down and forgot about it. So thanks for bringing that up.
Not that I want to remember that because.
Yeah. Exactly. Anyway, thank you all. Thank you for all your time and stuff. And when I was talking about volunteers, that includes all of you. I mean, we get paid something, but really, and I'll say this maybe after our first meeting of the year, but I really do appreciate everybody here that's on the board and the amount of time and energy that goes into everything. And we're really lucky in this village. We have some great people and on all our boards that have really filled in, that are really good at it, I feel. So it's tough. And if you just have a small pool of people to get the people and the quality that we do, is really amazing. So thank you guys all. It has been a tough year, and I feel emotionally, physically, and mentally. So thank you all, and we'll see you in a week
Next week.
and continue stuff. But anyway, thanks everybody. And
Thank
good
you,
night.
Mr. Mayor.
We need a
Motion.
motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
I think everybody gets acknowledged on that one.
Okay, so we have Kathleen with the motion and Fran with the second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Good night.
Good
Good
night.
night, all.
And I.